Welcome to EDIC's June 1st, 2021 special meeting. EDIC's mission is to support and enhance the economic environment for current and future businesses, residents, and the community at large, which is particularly relevant to today's conversation. At our last regularly scheduled meeting, we had a conversation that got into much more detail about how we're thinking about a strategy to address vacant storefronts in the city. And today is an opportunity for us to think more deeply, specifically about and only about that topic. So, on our agenda, we have some proposed things to tackle. I will admit, Korczak, to design draft strategy/ordinance language for vacant storefronts, consider a registry. How would the registry work? Who would collect that information? What does it mean for us to exhaust all options in going through this process? Who do we talk to first? What is our intent? Is it documented? What is it? And what flexibility can we build into this that is reasonable? How do we tie this to city revenue? How does all this work? And we have some precedent from the town of Arlington provided by Allie Carter last time. And Cassie has received a response back from Alan, I want to say, in Northampton.
Correct.
Okay. I didn't share that with everyone, Cassie, because work is a nightmare. So do you want to give us a summary of what you learned from Alan?
Sure. I was surprised he wrote back right away and basically said it's not high on the list of David Napperstack's list of priorities for his last 6 months in office. They had considered it pre-COVID, but it didn't go anywhere. He made the point that sometimes storefronts are under agreement so that they wouldn't want to give those people a penalty. I don't know much about commercial real estate leasing. Seems like we wouldn't want to do it if it's under agreement. There's something going on there. So other than that, he was curious to hear what we thought, where we thought we'd go. And also kind of raised the question about whether or not we want to do kind of periodic check-ins with our neighboring cities about what they've got on the books, maybe collaborate, that kind of thing. But that's a whole separate conversation.
Cool. And I shared with all of you what we got from Allie Carter. We got the presentation, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has access to that. Is there a proposal for where you'd like to begin talking about this?
Tom's the one with concerns about who it applies to, that kind of thing. There's that issue. And then it sounds like we were starting to reach a consensus about the registry last week. So I'll just throw that out as a way to, feel free to change direction, but just two top of mind topics.
Why don't we start with identifying what is termed a vacant storefront?
Ooh.
So that, it'd be sort of like, okay, that's not vacant under these terms, therefore,
yeah.
So I don't know if a vacant storefront, what's the definition of a vacant storefront? An unleased, unmarketed, unattractive. I don't, because there's that issue of aggressively marketing it is therefore it's not a blight. Like maybe are we talking about vacant versus blight? So questions.
When Arlington started out, they started out by looking at buildings that had been vacant a year or more in the central business district. But I think their policy then applies differently. It counts vacancy differently, right?
It was a really
like 4
short
months?
term. Yeah, something like that.
I think it's 90 days
90
now,
days.
isn't it? Yeah.
So 3 months.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, the question of vacant versus blight is relevant because we have every time we have this conversation, we know the 3 properties that we think of as the ones that are prompting this thinking in the first place.
Yeah.
So that's a discussion worth having.
And can you have a criteria as to what blight is? I mean, the grass has to be certain length, or there has to be certain quantities of trash in front, things like that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that might get into minutia of detail. I think just generally, if we put out a time period of which buildings are vacant, they're determined as a vacant building. Then we break it down into different categories of aggressively marketed, willing to show artwork, under agreement, all these other like outs of the situation. If we just simply put a unoccupied building for a time period, that basically qualifies all of them, and then we subcategories. That might be the way to go. That way, you know, we're not necessarily going after people because it's blight. We're just going after people in general because the stores are vacant.
And there's something else to be added to that, is that when something is unoccupied for, say, 3 months, then we're talking about the registry, right? Because once they're on the registry, no one has to go after them, so to speak, as long as they're working with the person who's holding the registry and showing good faith and all that. And the penalties should only come when they're either not working or they're added to the registry involuntarily, et cetera, et cetera. So that eliminates a lot of our problems, so to speak. It's solved by the registry holder.
Do we want this to apply to the entire city or only like business districts within the city?
Downtown business district, I would say, only because, you know, Northampton Street and all those, they're just way more complicated as far as zoning goes, whereas downtown business is pretty cut and dry.
And the other thing is that the downtown businesses being vacant are what really affect us economically, you know, versus like an empty house or an empty warehouse, something like that. Yeah, I think it should just be the downtown business district.
So for our purposes, does that include the parts of Pleasant Street that are not themselves the mill buildings?
Like the Pleasant Street. There's the whole neighborhood business district there too.
That is, that's the issue where it's both. And I don't know. I mean, I don't see that as a current problem. Perhaps we could expand, but if we simply focused from the Rotary to Holyoke Street or you know, the end of Cottage Street.
Is there any reason to just not include all commercial and just call it a day?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Something just came to mind as well, too. I mean, part of this is addressing the issue of the vacancy, but also part of it is kind of having the benefit of a list of vacant properties that, like, somebody from outside of Easthampton can see, you know, and if we're saying, oh, it's only going to be this area, then people might go look at the list, but there's plenty of properties that might suit their needs outside of it that maybe they're like, oh, Easthampton doesn't have anything for me. You know, if they say, oh, here's the list of vacant storefronts, but it's only applying to this one part of our city. Even though I was just a minute ago of a mind that it should only really be the downtown area. But, you know.
Then we do enter the problem with, I think Gwen brought it up a little bit, all the Eastworks places that are available. Do we want to get into that too? Although they are aggressively marketing them, they work that pretty hard. But for example, there's a lot of other mills there too.
I think like what Arlington was doing was like maybe the fee would be waived under certain things, but they would still have to register, even if they were aggressively marketing and all of these things.
Yeah. Well, in terms of, unless I was mistaken, in terms of vacancies like within one of the mill buildings, that doesn't necessarily affect us because the hallways are managed by the by the building owner. I mean, one of the reasons we're doing this, unless I'm mistaken, is because the buildings that are in question are eyesores. And that wouldn't necessarily be the case with empty condos, if you will, or business spaces within a mill building.
So maybe the scope is street facing or something similar to that.
Maybe it's something where registry or however this policy is kind of like mandatory within the business district we define, but anyone from outside of that who would like to be included on that listing of available properties could submit their information as well.
I just want to throw out that looking at empty business space, no matter if it's inside or outside, doesn't give you a good feeling for whatever that's worth. So maybe, do you want to go to the Cottage Street Mills if it's mostly empty? So maybe we do want to look at everything. Just throwing it out there.
But who would see that, though? I mean, people driving around in town wouldn't necessarily see empty spaces within a mill building. And then again, I think it's the onus is on the mill building managers to fill those spaces.
I see both sides, yeah.
Yeah.
I really see this more of a storefront. Anybody with storefronts,
street facing,
is the lowest hanging fruit and common denominator, and kind of what, from my perspective, I'm looking to rise all these ships on Main Street by all this, commercial stuff that I see happening on Cottage Street because they're all rented, versus Main Street, I've got 5 vacant and two more on either side. So it's really, I think a storefront would be the easiest thing for us to focus on, and less vague.
Are buildings zoned are buildings zoned to storefronts? Or is there some identifier that says this is a storefront property?
Yeah, it's something can switch from being a retail establishment to a restaurant. Or is a restaurant considered a storefront?
Yeah.
No, but we have zoning in the downtown area that says you can't have residential on the ground floor.
Mm-hmm.
So surely there's a definition somehow in there, isn't there? Because they have something about something that isn't ground level.
Is that mixed use? Is that
maybe?
So I think they're mixed use buildings or things that are often talked about like that. Presumably this policy would only apply to ground level, or
I think some of the issue with what we're kind of circling around is you can have a retail space like say where Luthier's is. If they wanted to rent it to an office, they could. And so I think street facing might capture everything unless someone can think of an example that's not caught in that net.
Mm-hmm. And then it can be an exception. Yeah. And a slight point of order, we're spending a lot of time on this, which is good, but there's going to be a lot more to talk about after we make this determination.
Sure. So what would this fall under? The scope of what? The scope of vacancies, right?
Yeah.
So we're down to street level 3 months or more, right?
The street facing.
Street facing.
So,
okay, sorry.
Let's see. I'm not muted. Okay. Here's Arlington's bylaw. A vacant building is any unoccupied, non-residential, commercial, or industrial real property which A, is not legally occupied, is abandoned, or is not used for a period of at least 90 consecutive days or longer by occupants having custody or legal right of entry to such property, or B, which is intermittently occupied by persons with legal right of entry but exhibits, in the opinion of the building inspector, dilapidated walls, roof, or doors which fail to prevent the entry of a trespasser for a period of more than 7 days.
So they are capturing their mills, which I presume they've got.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds like it's broad and it covers a lot, which is fine because then it just means that, everybody can be inclusive in it, and that we could have conversations about getting people registered who are all over the place.
And you know, for our intentions, having it be broad could be better because it gives us more leeway
and a bigger list.
Yeah,
there are a lot of places that are not on Craigslist or Taylor or all the other places, like the October Building. You know, they're full of places. Where Furs are Flying on Ferry Street, they're full of vacancies, but you can't find them anywhere. So maybe broad is better.
In a way, too, it's almost insulationary when, if there's ever an accusation that we were targeting like certain businesses or certain properties. No, we didn't make this just to attack you. This is for a whole bunch of people this applies to.
Good point. Well, Captain O'Captain.
And I could say that that's our broad perspective, and that going forward, perhaps we put out there that we are just focusing on downtown storefronts first, the business district first, and then we're expanding it in the next few months. But sort of give us a target area and say you fall into this broad category, and as we expand, I'm just throwing it out there.
So are you thinking of that to play out with the idea of the registry, or how we would craft proposed ordinance language?
That would be the registry. The broad thing would be the registry.
Yeah.
And, that we would say that it's a daunting task to take it on, all of it, but we'll start with the downtown business district because that would have the most impact and sort of a less complicated learning curve, because they're pretty straightforward. 2,000 square feet, what would it be called? It'd be zone 4 retail, versus something on Northampton Street, like a big building is got a lot more setback issues and a whole layer of zoning issues that get complicated.
Sure. So when we talk about this registry, we are talking about it right now in pretty vague terms. Who would manage this? How do properties get listed on it? Whose responsibility is it to find that out? It's a bummer that Jeff isn't here to offer us some perspective on that, but I think it's worth talking about because right now it's hard to know whether we're saying, hey, we'll make a Google file, or Jeff being like, we'll house this at the city.
I believe that we should be responsible for the administration of it, and the city should help with the execution of services needed, whether or not it's mailing to property owners about the registration, about the policies, but it's like we should put the legwork in, and then they should do this the small ask at the end.
Yeah. I mean, have it be up to us to research and find out, keep our eyes open. Say, okay, it's been 2 months since that place has been empty. And then we follow up on it when it's been 3.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's anything I could think of that's more in our wheelhouse by our mission, And
the thing is, if we have it all nice and clean to then give to the inspection department or the planning department or whatever department it falls into, it's clear to them what their obligation is, whether or not it's an inspector to go look, or whether or not it's the planning department to assess fines or something like that, that it's all clear that we've done the groundwork and we've targeted specific locations that haven't complied, that kind of thing. And then they could do the enforcement, that we do, the registration letters, and we send those out, and that we sort of just let the city store our findings, and then that we say, hey, listen, now we need a city employee to step up. We've done what we can. We've done our notification. We've done our, hand holding with a realtor to get them to market it. and say, here we are 6 months later, can you then inspect the property, or can you then levy a fine or warning of a fine, that kind of thing, where I think we put too much responsibility on their end, they're going to drop the ball, and we could do 80% of the work and nothing will be achieved. Like if we do 95% of the work and then we say, listen, now we're relying on you because you've got more weight than we do.
And the other thing is that makes them, if anyone has to be the bad guy, that makes the city be the bad guy. And we could be the ones saying, hey, let us help you. Let us help you get this issue solved. I mean, that was one thing I really was struck by Allie's presentation, is that she started out from a vantage point of being nice, kill them with kindness. And then when someone had to play the heavy, then the city would do that.
Yeah, and I mean, that is the right role for us in this situation at all, because we're volunteers. We are not compensated for this, nor are we elected. So there's not really a great way for us to be like, and now give the city money. That's their job, to levy a fine if they need to levy a fine, not ours. So do you imagine, maybe we don't have to get into the details of this now, so stop me if you want to move on to what comes next, but does this mean that we each have a beat and we monitor that beat on the regular, and we post stuff and we develop individually relationships with business owners? Like how do we imagine this process of creating and maintaining really works? Because I don't have a constant presence in downtown. That will be a new thing that I would be doing.
I'm kind of envisioning, sorry for me jumping in, but I'm kind of envisioning this being part of our monthly meeting. We say, okay, who's noticed such and such buildings around here? And I mean, think having one person have like a specific area that they're responsible for, that person leaves and someone else has to establish a whole new rapport. I think if we all just keep our eyes open and once a month say, this is what I saw on the docket. Okay, this is what Cassie saw on the docket. This is what Chris saw on the docket. I mean, the areas of question.
So I've got a suggestion, and it's just a suggestion. First, I think we need to identify the current buildings that we would think qualify, and then perhaps a cover letter that explains our intention of interest, the kill them with kindness kind of concept. Josh, to say that we're looking to emulate what we've seen in other communities, and we'd like to talk to them before we start to go through the process of registration, find out where they are, what their interest is, and say that we'd like to start to work with you before you even have to go through the whole registration process if that's an issue, and then sort of get a feel for maybe specifics that we could achieve based on the return or response from the cover letter. That make sense?
So Casey, would you do that before we proposed ordinance language to city council or after?
I'm almost thinking before. I mean, I think just to give people the general heads up that oh, wait a minute, I've heard about this before when all of a sudden they start to hear ordinance changes, or two, if they're going to be ordinance changes, they can have a voice on whether or not they'd like to have an input on it. So it's not coming out of left field that, wow, there's this new ordinance that I heard nothing about, and it's kind of specifically, targeting 5 businesses. I'm a little concerned now, as opposed to, oh, this sounds nice and creative. We got these volunteers organization trying to stimulate business in downtown.
My only thing about that is that if it works with these couple owners, then that's great. But I think we should still have something in place, because somewhere down the road we may run into this again with different business owners.
Oh, I'm not saying that we're stopping to go through with the ordinance. I'm just simply saying that we're gonna give a heads up, and if they want to be part of the process, to say like, okay, I understand you're setting a time frame at 3 months to be considered a vacant storefront. What are then all the exceptions to get off the fee list, the fine list?
Yeah.
Beautifying the property, marketing the property, explaining hardship, it's to help give us an input on why you think you should be exempt from fines associated with it, or what I mean. It's just.
Do we think there's anyone who would really be surprised to know that people are thinking about this? I mean.
Oh yeah, I think that the people that own on Union Street across from the Silas's building, the old fire station.
Okay. Oh yeah.
The single building between the hardware store and the assessor, or not the assessor, what is that? Surveyor. That empty storefront that was supposed to be a restaurant.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, right. I'm sure they're trying to do their due diligence. They're restaurateurs. They're not focused on being landlords. But all of a sudden they're talking about a fine. They're talking about this. Well, what do I have to do now? Gee, I didn't realize that this was an issue. So it's just one of those things where,
That's a good point. I mean, I was thinking of he who shall not be named, and so I didn't even think about other people.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. It's so that's where the thing is. It's all of a sudden there's an ordinance, and they're like, "What do you mean? I got to find a realtor. I got to find a tenant. Otherwise, this is going to be an issue. Otherwise, they could be sort of like, no, that sounds great. I'd appreciate the help. What do you need?
Good. That's a good point.
I think. Go ahead, Paul.
My understanding is, so the registry is going to be mandatory for all of these businesses that hit 90 days of vacancies or storefronts, right? And the fee will be dependent on the situation of the individual property, where it's being assessed to everyone, but it's being waived if you meet such and such criteria. The property's in good order. It's being used for an art display, as I thought was great that Arlington did that. And you're actively trying to fill this, you're marketing it, you can, you're stating this, you're signing it, your fee is waived. But if they don't register for it at all, Arlington's charging $100 a day fee after that 90-day period. And I don't know if we were considering doing something like that, but I guess going back to an earlier idea, the idea that like we would divvy up maybe areas of the city, right? And everybody, we don't want a business to say, well, hey, my person who should have been on top of this in my area, who's on EDIC, didn't inform me enough over these 90 days, and now I'm being fined, and now it's the EDIC's fault.
So I think that I see that, and that's a really good example of what might happen. But I think that when we're crafting the ordinance, we should give EDICs clear rights and responsibilities that's trying to be achieved, and then let EDIC handle fulfilling those rights and responsibilities as they see fit, because there's always going to be different chairs and different members, and they're always going to want to do things differently, and that's a strength, not a problem. So we should be a little careful about codifying into the ordinance EDIC's day-to-day operations on this matter. Just give them a mission and let EDIC figure it out. But I see that point, Paul, and I think that would be something that EDIC would have to wrestle with if that were to happen. And I don't know what the solution would be, but I don't think the ordinance is the place for that.
I just mean that the responsibility should be on the business owner, not on a committee of appointment.
Oh, sure. I'm with you.
Yeah, if you give them notice, here's how this works, then they should be able to review that, understand how it works, and go from there. And then the onus is on them to work with the city / work with us to figure it out if they want to get that fine waived.
Yeah, I think that anything EDIC does is bonus to what the ordinance sets for.
Right.
So I get you.
All right, so we're slowly rolling out an idea of first things first, and I see a pattern across the conversations we've had about this. Casey, you've made this same suggestion about identify the current properties we're talking about, figure out a letter, give it to them, and sit down and have conversations with people who are willing to have conversations about it before we then move into, and hey, city council, here's this ordinance that we propose you should do. Give people some say of some kind. So I think that is well worthwhile. I think it's democratic in the best sense.
And I think it actually does give us a little bit of ammunition going forward to city council, as far as we have reached out, we've started a conversation. This is how far we've gotten. This is why we want to propose this. Not like, oh, we've seen other communities do this, we want to propose this. And all I could hear is one council person saying, well, have you reached out to them? Have you spoken to them yet? They'd be like, well, not exactly. So that's where I think that a cover letter, a kind of explanation to them about why we're putting together an ordinance. And the goal is, it's not a fundraiser, it's not a taxation, it's really about beautification and maximizing the value and the look of the city and helping the economy.
Yeah, and I would take it one even step further and not have it be a letter that goes out. Is that we should, one or two of us should actually approach the business owners in question, like the way that they did in Arlington. They said they had three main people. They went out to each one individually, and got their response. And it turns out one of them was really easy to work with. But one size is not necessarily going to fit all. So I think reaching out, yes, have a letter that we bring, but say, look, we want to work with you on this, and be face to face, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I'd be happy to be on that, to be one of those people.
I'm a little confused about the registry. When does that come into play? Before city council or after city council?
I think after city council, and I think what the thought might be is that while we're getting the ordinance written, we also do the groundwork of contacting.
Got it.
And that way,
Okay, great. Thanks.
Do we
I think in the meantime, we start drafting. Here are the ones that we see.
Do we have a registration form from Arlington? Do they have a form that we could just take that they have?
If they do, we can go look at their website, because it's all held on their city or their town website. Okay,
and just put that in the cover letter and say we're basically following their path of success. This community has shown a success in different levels, between finding new tenants, beautifying the neighborhood, and identifying landlords' issues or needs.
And I think in that same line of thinking, we should make a schedule, break up the current ordinance that they've got into an X amount of parts, and figure out how long we want to be working on this. And then for the next X meetings, 6 meetings maybe, we go over a piece of their ordinance and basically copy it, but see what we want to apply and what not to apply, and how we want to customize it. And I think by the end of that process, we might have a cohesive ordinance. It might only be 3 meetings, just however many we agree on.
Yeah, it is. Article 17 has 8 sections, but 1 section is definitions. Okay. 9 sections. The last one's only 1 sentence. So it sounds like we have 3 primary tasks: to create a list of current properties. Like, here is the address. Here's maybe what it most recently was. Here's who owns it. I don't know how you found that out if you don't know them already.
We can find that out through the city, can't we?
There's a website called Axis. I'll put it in the chat, but it's axisgis.com, and then it's /Easthampton. And I just want to make sure I type it right. And then what you can do is, just like Google Maps, you can surf around and click on it's all broken down into parcels. And then you can pull up the property card. You can see all the permits that were pulled. Everything that's public information that's cool. There. It's a very.
That's what I use to find my property lines. Okay.
Yeah, I use it constantly for all sorts of things. It's a great site.
Wow.
Okay. Thanks.
That's getting bookmarked.
So that's useful. We need a draft cover letter. We need to find what Arlington's registry form looks like. We can go look at their website, just see the stuff that they collect in the first place, because they collect other stuff like what's the rent that you charge for this space? Is it negotiable? Stuff like that, I think.
Is that in their planning department? I've got their website right here. I'm trying to find.
Allie Carter is their economic development person. So if there's an economic development section to that website, it might be there. And what else? What should our next tasks be?
What about the penalty thing? So now you've hit 90 days. You're at the Cape, you're never coming back, and you're just going to let the building life fallow. Are we going to do the $100 a day piece with exceptions? One thing I was impressed by is that they apply these rules very she said they do apply them very uniformly. You can meet an exception criteria, but not, he's such a nice guy. I would hate to do this to him.
Yeah.
So it looks like they use the registry as their driver of a lot. So failure to register is $100 a day, which it presumes that you know that there is something to register, which presumes a lot of information that I'm curious about how we get, like if it's not super I don't know. If we're talking about our business district, it should be pretty simple to know that. And also, if we're the ones who are supporting people to get on that registry, I don't know how we hold people to that. So that's worth talking about. But
well, that's where the city comes in. I'm sorry.
That's true.
And that's where the power of the committee comes in to say, okay, just get on the register. We'll waive that $1,000. Yeah.
Right. So then they also say every 90 days, if you're vacant, you have to have a building inspection. And so we're going to charge you $100 for that building inspection, and it has to happen quarterly.
I think that's the meat of that whole ordinance, because I think no owner wants to have the building inspector come sniffing around if they don't need it, to be honest.
But the meat of that is also the impotence to charge them something. Otherwise, because I don't think the building's going to change, right? 3 months later, nothing's changed. There's locks on the door. It's all safe. But I think it's the impotence to say, oh, wow, it's costing me $400 a year. I should do something about it. So it's the way I think that they just figured out how that they can put a money to it, you know what I mean? And a service to it. Like, oh, we'll send an inspector out as opposed to an arbitrary bill. You know what I mean? That's what I think that was about.
Yeah, I think
they had to clearly tie it to business, to city operations and a revenue. Like, what is this going toward? What is this for? So it's a flag. It's not a penalty, because $400 for some people, no biggie. It's just it's an inconvenience that we're constantly reminding you, being the gnat in your ear. So yeah, I think that part is important. We could be creative and think of other ways to levy a fee, but the building inspection is also tied to half of that definition of what counts as vacant. So it could be a dilapidated place where it's easy to get in as a person who doesn't own the joint to trespass, those sorts of things.
It could also be a situation where if somebody has gotten a waiver for the fee, that inspection is, verifies compliance. So, they're waived for the fee, but 6 months from now, the whole place is a disaster and there's no art there, and they just did it just to get it waived. Well, now we have an inspector who says, well, hey, something's changed here, and now you got to pay us the fee.
Right. So what do we think? Cassie, you brought this to the fore. I don't know how we deal with the failure to register thing, but the fee for a building inspection every 90 days, $100. What do we think of that? When you got the message back from Alan, he was like, this isn't going to make enough money to justify it. And I think we're coming at it from the opposite perspective, which is we're not trying to make money. we're trying to make this a more livable, pleasant space for people to be in.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about $100 for a building inspection every 90 days?
Fine.
You're muted, Cassie, but I like your.
Is the city losing money on that? You know,
The city will lose money on it. I think that Arlington. I think she explicitly said that they lose money on it.
Oh.
But it's not the point. You know, it's just get moving with your property. You know.
Okay.
And they're a much larger city than we are, and I think that you know, and again, if the city needs to have more employees to handle inspections, I know that the health department was way understaffed for years, and now it's much better staffed. You know, so it's evaluating what the city's needs are on a yearly basis with a budget. And it might get some legs for a couple of years. It might be worth it, and they might keep it, or they might say, all right, 3 years in, we're taking this off the inspector's ledger because it's too crazy. We don't have the money for it. He's too busy. Geez, and we actually kind of solved the issue with the half of the storefronts we wanted, and we're all set anyhow.
Yep. Another thing that she said during the presentation to clarify why they're happy losing the money, not happy, but accepting losing money, is because by law you can't have a money grab, right? So you can't create an ordinance that levies fees that aren't justified. So in order to stay within compliance of that law, they are basically undercharging with their $100 registry fee. So there's no legal ramifications of charging too much. Because, and again, that wasn't the point, you know, it wasn't to make money, but, and I think that the building inspector who's on the payroll, see, that's where it gets tricky. It might not really cost the city anything unless it causes more hours to be pulled by the building inspector, which is just out of our wheelhouse, I think.
I think it's worth paying attention to. Whatever our draft list of properties that we know about this week, for example, looks like, we can find out from the building inspector how long does a building inspection usually take.
I just want to clarify, maybe I was a little confused. I was under the impression there's a $400 fee for registering on the vacant property list.
No.
No, so it's $100 every 3 months.
If you register, if you fail to register and we know that you're vacant, it's $100 a day. Right. After that point, if you're on that registry for 90 or more days, you get a building inspection, and then you are levied a $100 fee for the building inspection. And as long as that property remains on that list, because it falls into those categories, one of those categories, every 90 days, you keep getting a building inspection. You keep getting fined $100 for that building inspection.
Right. On the PowerPoint presentation they gave us, it says $400 annual registration fee per vacant storefront.
Yeah, she was talking at the level of, she was talking about their initial, I think their initial list of properties, going, okay, we looked at all the ones that had been vacant for a year, and then we imagined what that would look like on a yearly basis if that continued.
Okay, that's what.
But then ultimately it breaks it down into quarterly fees.
Okay.
So you have opportunities. It's not like you got on the registry at all, we're giving you a $400 bill. It's every 90 days, we're going to check in to see if you're making progress, that sort of thing. So you have a chance to pay anywhere between $0 and $400.
All right, makes more sense now. Thank you.
And so just because I don't quite remember, you register after, you have to register within 90 days of being vacant. Mm-hmm. And then you have another 90 days to get unvacant, or you get inspected, right? So you have 6 months before you get inspected.
Yes.
Okay. That's reasonable, I think.
Yeah, and their application is super easy. All it basically is your address, the owner, square footage. So it's, and then the list, they've got about 20 properties listed. So it's not a very taxing thing to impose somebody. They're like, all we're just asking you is put on the list.
Yeah.
One thing that other vacant storefront ordinances had, I don't think Arlington has it, is that the owner is required to post their name and number on vacant property, contact information. I like that myself. What if there's a fire? You know, how do you reach this person? But also, Casey.
There's social media embarrassment. There's shaming. That's all.
Well, I didn't want to bring that up about the shaming, but it is shaming, and it's good. So.
Yeah, that's actually,
I'd
be in favor of adding it.
So, identify current properties, draft a cover letter. We've already checked off Find Arlington's registry form. Would you share that link with us, Casey, in an email?
Sure.
Cool. And from that, we can draft our own online form. I don't care. And what else? Come up with a plan for how we address this sequentially at upcoming meetings.
So do we have a copy of the ordinance that Arlington has? Okay.
Yeah, in that email that I sent you that had Ally Carter's presentation in it, okay. There's a link to the language of the bylaw itself.
Cassie, you're shaking your head.
Josh, I'm just telling Josh that he didn't miss anything.
Sorry about that.
So let's all take a look at, as part of the action plan, let's take a look at the ordinance and come up with an opinion on how many meetings we should spend on it. And let's plan to actually start it next meeting, start going through it and editing and copying. And maybe that's even a good thing. We could see how far we get, and then we'll have a better idea of how long it's going to take. Because, the charter review, that's exactly what they do. They go through it section by section, and it took them 1.5 years to get through the charter review. That's a long document. We might be able to get through it in 2 meetings, 3 meetings, 2 meetings, and then finalize it on the 3rd. So I don't think it's that big a task if we're all looking at it.
Okay, so after we've got, does anybody want to take on the role of maybe teaming up to identify current properties and write out our draft list of who we might want to initially talk to?
I can do that.
Josh is on that list. Okay.
Josh, with you, Josh. Casey, okay, cool.
Would you
team.
Would you guys be willing to make a Google Doc and just share it with the committee, and then we could add to it?
Yep.
Yeah. Maybe a little less formally than you guys.
Okay.
Do we need approval from anybody to keep going with this? Or a preliminary sense of agreement, like from city council or whatever?
If we do anything substantial, but otherwise I'd say it's easier to ask apologies. And
forgiveness, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is well within EDIC's purview to address something, do some research with people in the community first, and offer our best suggestion to the city on behalf of the city's businesses and residents. That's our whole thing. And I think I think it's fine to continue in this vein. Like we're not making the rules ourselves. We're going out there and saying, imagine a world where this was true. What would you want it to look like? Draft cover letter explaining our intentions. Anybody want to work on it?
So that's interesting timing, right? If we go too early, if it takes us three months, for instance, to create a draft ordinance, and then it's going to take another 3 months to get it before city council once it goes through all of its stuff, maybe it's too early to start that. Maybe it's not. Maybe we should
just a draft cover letter basically gets at the things that we've talked about today. I think it gets at, here's why we're thinking about this. Here's the kind of structure we're thinking about. And what do you think? Let's talk.
It's literally, you could just steal what Arlington's done. It's just put that into our words. And it's pretty cut and dry.
I could give it a shot.
Yeah? All right. If you want to work together, let me know. All right. So that's... Okay. So I will send out a message to everyone that in advance of June 15th, which is our next meeting, which I've listed so far as going till 5:15. So we have 75 minutes, not just 60. If everybody has a chance to review the ordinance beforehand, that's your homework. And I will remind everyone next week, you have a week to do this. Then presumably we can come to that meeting with some thoughts to share, scribbles on pieces of paper. I don't know what. Also, when the state of emergency isn't going to be lifted by then, we're not doing that meeting in person, maybe ever again. I don't know, but
I don't know the rules on that, but I think we're allowed to be in person if we wanted to. I don't think we're prohibited. We just have to have
recording.
We have to have, yes, recording and access for the public to not come. So we'd have to set up a camera or something, or a screen.
I'm not back into Easthampton until June 16th. So.
Oh, okay.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, it's fine with me to do a Zoom session again, and maybe by the middle of the summer, we'll be able to see each other in person in a different way. Okay, so is this reasonable? People have tasks that they are ready to work on, want to deal with?
Yep.
And if anyone has gets overwhelmed, just let me know, because I feel like I don't have much on my plate for this right now.
Okay. Hey, quick, before we stop, Cassie, who was the person you spoke to in Northampton?
Unmute yourself, Cassie. Unmute.
Sorry, birds and airplanes here. Allie Carter.
No, in Northampton.
Oh, in Northampton. I'll send you his name.
Okay.
Feynman, is that it?
Alan
Wolf.
Oh. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Northampton's got such a problem with Eric Shore owning so much property that I think that was a fight that they didn't want to deal with.
That comes across really loudly in that message from him.
And that may be the same thing that we deal with Moriarty, is that he's just going to be indifferent to the whole thing and not give a rat's ass about any of us or whatever the city does. And so
like Mr. Dirt on my shoes in Arlington.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, Mr. Dirt on my shoes was so annoyed by the fee that they got moving on that in a way. So
right.
I'm willing to hold out hope.
Yep.
$100 a day is not cheap.
No.
No, but it's not. I mean, the steps to get registered, they're so much less expensive.
Sure.
I don't know.
But if the inspector went in and condemned the building, maybe that would matter.
No, so my sort of vision with this is that if there's a registry that has lists of commercial storefront and realtors have access to it, and when somebody says for the 100th time, I want to be on Cottage Street, and they say there's nothing on Cottage Street, here's the list of commercial stuff, and they just bug Moriarty one more time, he says, fine, I'll let you list it, I'll let you look at it, rent it. But I think it's the squeaky wheel in his case, that if it happens enough, then he'll have to deal with it. Instead, he just gets tire kickers that, hey, I'm interested, and he doesn't return calls, so nothing ever happens. So maybe it's just enough momentum to be sort of like, fuck it, Cannon, rent these places, or Taylor, rent these places, or whatever.
All right, friends, we're going to end this meeting. Gotta go. I liked it. You're all very smart, and I'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
All right, bye.
Hey, watch for the
Bye,
minute.
guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Josh, bye.
Bye, everyone.